aligned go-to-market organization. Obviously, there is plenty of surface area to cover when thinking about the different, interaction points, interlocks, in ways that, different go-to-market functions need to be aligned. We chose the quintessential sales and marketing engagement point. We thought it was necessary, just given sort of the insatiable thirst for top of funnel, especially right now in the world. And so that's where we're going to be focused on today's conversation. There will be AI involved, so I don't want you to feel like you're missing out by foregoing that session up top. But anyway, this is a pretty big pattern that we see with our clients in terms of dysfunction, and so that's where we'll be spending the time today. Just to give you a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going, we'll talk about this concept of the paradox of success, just to sort of establish the foundation here, and then we'll get into the different critical success factors or enabling functions, sort of common failure points, if you will, when it comes to sales and marketing collaboration. So I can't see the slides. This is a unique dynamic for me where the TV is actually in front of my vision. So, if it starts doing weird things, let me know. Jared, how you doing today? How are you feeling this morning? This is our co-host, Jared Barrow.
Hey, everybody. And I'm okay.
Yeah?
After last night's tacos, yes. My name is Jared, everybody. I've had every job in sales that exists. I smiled and dialed, 50 calls a day minimum. I've done that. Led SDR teams, an AE in the field. I was an RVP, AVP. I've built multi-level sales organizations and went over to pre-sales and IC, and then managed pre-sales organizations covering over $200 million in ACV, and then went to the dark side of operations and strategy, where I've run that function for really large companies, Salesforce Industries. I built and ran that function, mid-sized PE turnarounds, doing the deep 30% cuts across go-to-market, and being the guy on the plane having to deliver some news. And then I've done the hyper-growth on the other side. And so I've seen a lot of different flavors of this, from inside, from outside. I have some strong points of view. So Jamie reached out. I was really excited to get in the room and have this conversation with you all.
Awesome. As far as my background is concerned, I haven't gotten into too much detail on this. So I've been in the business now for a little over 4 years, been in go-to-market all my career. Talk about crappy jobs right out of college. I started my career with Dish Network in Denver, working in call center operations. Dish at the time was voted the worst company to work for by Glassdoor 2 years in a row. So I started from the bottom and now we're here, so to speak. But anyway, I joined Accenture in 2015. Been an advisor on go-to-market since then. Been a practitioner as well. Held operations roles at Accenture, sales roles at Accenture, sales roles at SBI. And so I've seen, to Jared's comment as well, this dynamic from a couple of different vantage points. And so I'm happy to be here today. We've got some good content, we think, but we want to learn from you all as well. We don't want to make this just a presentation. And so we really hope to kind of have a group discussion here as we get into it. But first, the paradox of success. I think the overall theme here is that growth, as we all can relate, is not typically linear. It is not typically a function of a single tactic or strategy. It's hardly the case that we find a business that's grown really successfully or effectively just selling the same thing over and over and over again to the same buyer and the same geo, et cetera. And so as you grow, you're expanding, into different geos, adding new products, maybe making moves across segments, partnerships, and M&A. And the paradox is alluded to on the x-axis. What do you guys think the x-axis is going to be? Any guesses? Nope. JB, what do you think the x-axis is?
If anyone here listens to me long enough, you're going to hear me talk about maturity models and how businesses grow. And as they grow, they get more complex as well.
Right, complexity. And so I think everybody can relate to this. Obviously, it's not a very it's not an earth-shattering analogy by any means. One other way I was thinking recently in terms of ways to summarize this, if anybody listens to hip hop or old school rap, Notorious B.I.G., more money, more problems, is the other way to just very quickly simplify this. So the goal is to give you guys tactics and strategies and some details and discussion and connection points on how to manage this complexity so that it doesn't manage you. And so the 3 critical success factors that you see up top here, we'll talk about this interaction point of sales and marketing. Come on in, boys. This interaction point between sales and marketing, I use the word handoff. We'll talk about why that's a little bit of a misnomer or something that we're trying to refer to with a little more nuance. Orchestration across the customer lifecycle of account-based strategies, very specifically account-based marketing, account-based experiences, some buzzy things in that category. So we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean and some common friction points. Jared's going to talk about visibility and insights and how some very specific workflows are powering better conversion, better collaboration across functions today. It's impossible to have this conversation without talking about AI. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't want you all to feel like you're missing out on what's going on upstairs. And so we've got a little bit of AI dabbled here within, and then the fundamentals, so to speak. None of this matters, or you'd be able to expect results if you didn't have some of the basics figured out. And so we'll talk about those. What's your take here? How do you want to?
Yeah. So
comment?
During BJ's talk before this or this morning, he talked a lot about I liked his hexagons. He had up on the screen. And what are the fundamentals of how we think about building an aligned go-to-market organization? And just show of hands, who here feels that their organization has this down really well? Okay. So that is really the core of all of this, right? That's where we need to focus. That's where we need to spend the time, spend the calories. Everything on top of that is icing. It's really great to get nice, solid AI fundamentals down and AI workflows down and build out really robust scoring methodologies. If you don't have the fundamentals of running a sales and marketing organization, none of that matters in the end. And so we're going to talk about some practical tips, things you can do for that.
So let's go there first. A lot on this page, so I'll unpack it. I have some builds on my slides later, so I didn't want to overdo it with this. I probably still should have, but anyway, what you're looking at here, you'll see the fundamentals that we want to talk about here on the right. But just graphically speaking, we've got the typical buying personas. This is an example from a client that I'm working with right now who's an AI space, enterprise AI platform plus services, and these are their technical user and economic buyers, not necessarily yours. Beneath that is the buyer journey. This is not theirs specifically, but more of a generalized version. I would say commonly something we encounter or would expect to see and prescribe in software. And then down here is something I've abstracted to the go-to-market workflow, lead to renewal, essentially, at a high level. And the 3 different critical success factors that emerge, and in some cases your reaction might be, yeah, tell me something I don't know. But for whatever reason, so commonly we encounter disconnects with our clients along these different dimensions, and that can't happen for what we're about to show you if you are to expect results and impact. So number 1, do we have a common understanding of our ICP, their buying personas, or our buying personas, and what their role is in the purchasing process? One sort of common characteristic of businesses that don't have this figured out is they are companies that are selling to across segments in terms of the size or the market. We recently helped a client who grew up in sort of the mid-market and SMB space trying to penetrate the enterprise space. Well, the buying persona in an enterprise for a recruiting platform is not the CEO that it was in the SMB or the mid-market where you grew up. It is now the VP of talent acquisition, the director of talent acquisition. And so understanding not just who the buying personas are, but then how do they look differently as you move up and down that account pyramid is the point there. Shared understanding of the buyer's journey and do our workflows correlate one-to-one. The correlation one-to-one is really, really the important point on this. The common observation that we see and really work with a lot of clients on is they may be generalizing certain components of their workflow to individual or discrete segments of the buyer's journey. And the impact of that is that you can't meet the buyer where they are. If they are at X stage in the buying process and you're trying to agree with them on a solution, but they're back here in terms of discovery or commitment to change, but you don't have that visibility because you've generalized that, there's going to be a lot of breakage at that segment in the sales process. Normally you and I have worked on that with a couple of different clients. And then last piece, are we one cohesive team and collaborating accordingly? This can be as simple as having marketing present in your CRO's QBRs. Weekly syncs where you are, we'll talk more about this concept of weekly collaboration here in a minute. Basics along those lines, having common incentive structures, having interconnected goals and financial metrics was something that JD talked about yesterday a lot. Last thing I'll make is to tee you up. We were talking over tacos and brewskis last night about another one, a bonus item that I hadn't considered, but I think is a really important one. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so there's a common phrase of you can't change what you don't measure, or also if you show me someone's comp plan, I'll tell you what they're going to do. And the same is true at the executive level, the C-suite. And so if your CMO's targets are A, your CRO's targets are A plus 15, well, how is he going to be successful or she going to be successful? The CMOs are different. Or if I think about it in a different direction, if your chief customer officer is targeted on GRR, but the ICP that you're driving in the CMO's organization is not one that's typically renewing well, what are you doing to that poor soul living all the way over here? Not setting them up for success. And so one of the things that I spent a lot of time on in the last 2 years is building out that really robust and I'll call it a conjoin of targets with all leveraging the same set of assumptions. Whether it's time to sell, win rates, conversion rates, and so on, ASPs by segment, or almost more importantly, who are we selling to and how do we come up with that? Because I come from a RevOps background, or more recently. When I think about the types of customers that I want to attract to a business, it is not going to be necessarily the easiest ones we sell to. It's going to be the ones that renew and expand. Because it might be more expensive to acquire, but on the long run of a 10-year run of a business, 15-year run of a business, or if you're private equity, 5 to 6 years, the goal here is how can we make a stable and predictable revenue stream? And if you're attracting customers, if you have an 85% GRR, you're not predictable in your revenue stream. For us, for the people in this room, sure, the sales people might be thrilled, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get a great exit. And so what I'm focused a lot on is how are we building an ICP that we're targeting in the beginning that maps exactly to what is expanding, growing, having that 3-month expansion, 6-month expansion before we get to the annual renewals. And so we'll talk a little bit about, I think on the next slide or slide after, how do you actually do that? How can you build that out this week and next week? Your first way of doing that.
Who owns the ICP, would you say? And how do you ensure alignment across the customer journey cross-functionally?
So I think that it's a role. I think this is one of the reasons companies hire RevOps. And you think about RevOps, I talk to different companies, and I hear different answers to the question of what does RevOps do in your company? Someone asked me that question. My answer is RevOps aligns the numbers at the top with the assumptions at the bottom with the ICP that we're trying to go after in the business. Because the answer of who defines the ICP is not going to be one person. Your CMO will say, yeah, of course I own it, I define it. Your CRO says, well, hold a second, I think I should have some say in that. And your chief customer officer's in the corner shaking anxiously because no one's thought about what's actually renewing. And we've all seen that too. So the role of RevOps is to be that glue that kind of sits between the three of them. And so who owns it? No one, everyone, all of us. That's why you hire someone in that function.
Where do you commonly see RevOps sitting within an organization? If they are meant to be the glue, if they're meant to be this sort of cross-functional connection point, how do you reconcile that with where they have to report from a lineage perspective?
It's a difficult question. I think a lot of companies struggle with this. There was a great survey a guy named Ryan Westwood did last October, I want to say. So he was the CEO of Simplus before they sold. Now he's CEO of a company called Fullcast, a platform for RevOps organizations. And what he came up with from that was today, actual data shows vast majority of RevOps sits under the CRO. Makes sense, it was an evolution of the sales ops function initially. Number two, CMO. Or CFO, excuse me. Very frequently RevOps can be CFO related. But, as I see someone here in the back, frequently that comes from why? Well, it comes from RevRec, comes from accounting, financial, the go-to-market accounting structures that start building into this RevOps function as well. That's a really common growth path for individuals. Another common one is the CMO. I've reported to CMOs in RevOps roles as well, and it's a very different role, and we'll talk about pros and cons in just a second of these three. And less common, but increasingly more common is the COO, which if you were to ask me, that's where I think it will sit in 2 to 3 years more often. Pro and con, CRO, most amount of influence in the organization, and especially in the short term typically, because, hey, a company has to meet a number. Con, your RevOps organization will never be as strategic as you want them to be. They will be focused on this deal, this territory, this quarter. They are not going to be focused on what can we do to drive that long-term ICP fit, long-term connective tissue across from sales, marketing, CS, and finance, making sure that all the metrics line. That's not going to be what they're motivated against because that's not what their boss cares about, usually. And that's not always true, but I think as a general rule. CFO is the same in the opposite direction. We are focused way, way, way more on RevRec, on post-deal accuracy, way less on the what has to be true from the ICP fit. And so you may miss that. Having them sit in the CMO is interesting. You get this really, I think it's the most strategic place today that RevOps can sit. It's, again, not very common, but by default you have them in the CMO seat. CMO wants to get the CRO's ear, wants the CFO to focus more on marketing. They want to make sure that their job is easier from a customer lifecycle perspective as well. So their interest directly aligns with that long range. Doesn't align as much with this week, this quarter outside of pipeline. That's another risk. My belief is that this role is evolving, and we're going to see. It started with sales ops pretty much being just renamed with a new title. Then marketing ops, CS ops, partner ops starts getting thrown into it. What I think is going to happen in 2 to 3 years is we're going to see most RevOps go-to-market ops people being general consultants across, more like a shared services across the business. In fact, the best hires I've made have been former consultants who come in, they've seen it all, they've done it all, and today they can be working on a comp plan. Tomorrow they can be working on a system or a tool. The next day they can be doing a really deep dive into business analytics to figure out what's our burn rate for the business. Those are the best people I've hired for these roles. And I think that's where it's going to sit. And then that's going to beget the next one, which is, well, this should probably report to the person who owns that capability set for the organization. Sometimes that's the CEO. Sometimes that's the COO. Hotel Engine has this function reporting to the CEO. Large Series C organization. Yes?
And you might touch on it, but at this point, you haven't brought up enablement. Is enablement typically sitting outside, depending on the size of the company, or does it sit within RevOps? Where is that going to sit? Because you're kind of moving this into more of an operational. I think just curious what your perspective is.
What do you see as the role of enablement in your organization?
Training, making sure that the reps have the right skills.
So skill sets, training. I would add something to that. And it's effectively the action arm of the strategy of the CRO and the CMO, right? Yeah. And so I've seen it sit under product marketing a lot. I've seen it sit under RevOps a lot. I think both are true answers. And I think the question for the individual organization is, as we think of that action arm, who is dictating the action in the organization? Well, let me rephrase it. Where's the political power sit in your C-suite? And that's where you should have that. As a black and white answer. I think it's way more nuanced than that, but it's a short answer.
Cool. I can just echo that. I think in past lives, I lead sort of our commercial ops function, which is RevOps, enablement, some other things. in past lives, I was sort of sales ops, and we had sales enablement, two separate teams, and that was challenging,
Right.
Right. And now having it under one roof, very collaborative, it's great because the enablement team exactly is the action arm. It's like, hey, here's what the data is telling us. Here's the challenges. What do we need to do with our reps and our managers to change behavior? And now all of a sudden, enablement's adjusting their roadmaps and their focus areas, and it's not, you're not sort of competing for priorities, right?
Exactly. And that's a really good argument to have it with RevOps. Another argument could be, hey, we are a product-heavy organization, right? Maybe you're a combination of hardware and software. You have large CapEx, and you need to make sure that people going out into the field and installing your server racks, and then teaching the team on how to do whatever type of software implementation to make sure there's low latency, et cetera. That has a really strong argument for, hey, maybe this should be in the product marketing organization, because the core competency becomes actual, the skill set. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that. I think one of the other factors you mentioned, political clout. I think where you position enablement, that's also really important, because you have to have the support of those C-level executives behind the enablement team as well. So it is a consideration, I think, whether you hop it in operations or put it under the CRO from that perspective too.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's keep going. I knew that would be a robust one. We're going to get into the first of the three different critical success factors. We'll talk a little bit about AI here in a minute. I'm just going to unpack this, and then Jared, invite you to jump in, and particularly on the AI topic. So what you're looking at here is, what should all, everybody should recognize as, pretty common workflow from marketing to sales in terms of a lead, getting to a sales qualified opportunity. We've got inbound leads here on the left side, and then on the righter side of the page, outbound leads being driven by XDRs. I've abstracted that, where the SDRs are working on the inbound stuff, BDRs, or in some organizations it looks different, are working on the outbound as well. The transition point in most organizations is at this very left side after an MQL has been established, or there is a demo request, or leads from events are another good example of the other. Those fall over to the SDR for an initial round of research. They accept or reject it based on basically it's just initial validity. There's some lightweight qualification, is probably not the right way to put it, but some lightweight research just to confirm that this is a real human at an ICP business of ours, and something didn't slip through the cracks. That goes into either an acceptance or disqualification, or this nurture cadence. That also, and probably more commonly, happens on the right side of the page, where the XDR does the actual qualification, and it does or doesn't work out. Now, the breakage points here are, number one, let me find my cursor on the screen, there we go, represented by this little red flashing light, in terms of the, that first transition point. We used to do a lot of work a few years ago on end-to-end workflow optimization and the definition of these, as you progress from one end of the page to the other. I would say that's less and less of an issue today. What is more the concern is the visibility and the tracking and collaborating across the aisle, where you are seeing data or performance that doesn't meet expectations in terms of SLAs or in terms of acceptance rates initially. So that's one piece to drive awareness on. The second set of opportunity friction areas are as you can see here in the upper right, where these leads go into somewhat of black holes, we've heard them referred to as, that don't get qualified and move on to sales. Now, the major issue there is one of workflow, and the solution is pretty simply feedback loops, and using the system to drive these loops back to marketing in terms of actually passing that contact back to marketing. with information around why it wasn't qualified or why it wasn't accepted. That the sticking point in that case is not usually that the CRM workflow doesn't exist, but it's either not being used or activated, and the collaboration between marketing, and sales isn't happening. Yes.
What are your thoughts on the lead scoring? So putting in a lead, and maybe you're going to address this, but just lead scoring methodologies, using that either manual or automated, and trying to shed light on that black hole that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so great question. We don't really talk about it a ton aside from the next point around here is instrumentation. I think lead scoring in general has a couple of different roles on this page. One, obviously, it's a primary driver of MQLs, but then back here, as you find yourself into these nurture cadences, Scott, where they're tripping over, behavioral indicators or intent indicators. Now, you don't want to react 100% of the time to, they visited the website, and you definitely don't want to sort of tell them while you're reaching out. But the way that we think about the generally scoring is doing a regression analysis around the behavioral and intent data that you can observe within your organization. You're at the mercy of that, and trying to create those relationships or predictive relationships between what the behavior is and what ultimately constitutes a really good lead. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a lot about this in theory on the next slide as well. But here's a short answer, which is I believe in 3 different scoring methodologies. And the same is true for leads, for accounts, for how you think about your go-to-market in general, which is 1, your firmographic and technographic. Let's just draw the box around the market that we decide to play in as a company. What's our company strategy today? 2, as your team are talking to the people, to your prospects, what are you getting back from that? And I mean this in a subjective way. It means that I spoke to Jamie. Jamie is not interested. Why? I don't know. Maybe he's looking for a new job. Maybe they just bought my competitor. If I can figure that out, I will. But lower priority. Number 3 is I believe that the static ICP, static scoring models that we used to build, I built out these really pretty, robust, dynamic, big spreadsheets. I think they're old. When I think about what is a good ICP score today, what's a good lead score today, I'm thinking about what have I sold in the last 30, 60, 90 days. And why? Yeah, and why? Mark Benioff has a phrase he uses a lot, tactics drive strategy. I think there's a lot to that. I didn't like that when the word strategy was in my title and I worked at Salesforce. I like it now. And so, stories behind that one. Here's how I want you to think about it, and I'm going to talk about this again in the next slide. If I can identify a market trend that we have been riding the tailwind of, I want to keep taking advantage of that. That is so hard to do for human beings, though, to identify that little amount of signal and so much noise. It is hard. It is near impossible. I haven't met anyone who does that manually today. I have done that with AI, and that's a great use case, which I'll talk about in the next slide.
Cool. So instrumentation, I think every organization has these different, inflection points, has data on those. For whatever reason, what we commonly see is that the visibility to that data across functions just does not exist. There is no Snowflake or whatever the warehouse or lakehouse is with the BI layer on top of that. And if there is, there aren't necessarily dashboards that allow you to slice and dice the data from an account or contact or persona data by characteristic, by industry, by deal size, by whatever the case is. And so that's the big takeaway on this, is making sure that visibility exists, is accessible, and folks are collaborating upon it. JB, the question I have for you is around AI. What are some of the common reference points or points of crosshairs do you see for AI in this workflow?
Yeah. So again, a lot of signal, a lot of noise right now. Well, less signal, a lot of noise in the market today. I think some of the great things I've seen. I'll go right to left to right on the slide. This area here, is a robust, ripe, easy area for AI to jump in and take effectively the role of an analyst in your marketing operations function away. It can come in there and it can do this fast, dynamic, better quality, better standardization, more consistently. As we get into these cycles here, call intelligence, I think, is phenomenal. I'm a big Dung proponent, and I'll talk more about why in a minute, but there's so much in that tool and in that platform that you can use to help you with your qualification, help you identify trends, identify risks from a personnel perspective, who's performing, how, where, why, et cetera, in your SDR core, in your AE core, et cetera. So I think that's number two. I will be honest with everyone here. I don't like any of the AI SDR tools I've seen, touched, demoed, tried. I think it's a little early. And so I couldn't stand here and recommend any of them. One's been in the news a lot recently for maybe making up some churn data, maybe not. But I just think that all of them, it's not seeing the results on an outbound that it should. I will say inbound, however, I think is the only use case right now for an AI SDR. Someone actually reaches out and raises their hand, they should be able to schedule a call or bypass the call, get the information. They should be able to do that tomorrow. Conversa did that well, but there's a lot of companies that did that inbound well. 6 Sense pretends to. I tried implementing that, and I didn't get a ton out of it. I'll be honest with you all here about my experiences trying to implement a lot of vendors over the past couple of years. So your mileage may vary. So one other thing are the nurture cadences. So I remember when I built my first sales organization, and I hired my first 4 SDRs, and we were trying to figure out how do we make them focus on what? Because there's really 3 things that they should focus on. It's how do we bring, one big thing, how do we bring in more business? But that breaks down to people who we haven't talked to yet, people who we talked to but weren't ready, existing customers that we want to go wider. And so how do I prioritize those 3 things for Jane Doe, John Smith sitting here at this table in their cubicle? And I think AI does a much better job of that prioritization than a human does in a much more dynamic and fast way, because it can take other intent signals that you're collecting and decide which of these nurtures are ripe and ready, or should we just stack it with, here's that top-down scoring list that we were just talking about. That's where you should be following. So I think that's another great use case as well.
Cool. Okay. On to the next piece, orchestrating ABX across the customer lifecycle. So why are we talking about this here? I think generally what I'm hearing from clients, and I think it's reflective in our own business as well, is that search does not perform the same way that it used to. It's a insanely tedious task to keep up with the changes in algorithms from Google, and then on top of that we've got GPT and Perplexity and the like, who are probably on the cusp of monetizing that capability as well. And so it's a very dynamic landscape. Top of funnel is just generally challenging to drive in terms of some of the legacy tactics. And what we're advising, what we're seeing success with ourselves, is more of an account-based posture. And what does that refer to, or when is it a good time to use that? It is, in terms of the first question, isolating and driving personalization and more engagement through the lens of an account, looking at the buying decision team in total as opposed to just individuals, and really trying to resonate with them on a different level than you would if you were just spraying and praying. So that's one. When does it work and is most effective, or what are some of the prerequisites? It's a more resource intensive motion, obviously, and so you need to play up market. You need to have relatively healthy average deal size. This is not a long tail down market type of tactic and strategy. The economics don't work out. So it's not for everybody. But anyway, what you see here is a generalized workflow of what an ABX concept looks like. We ripped this from a playbook that we did for a client a couple of years ago, and the steps are still the same. Jared will talk about some changes he's seen in the most recent world, but marketing, developing initial focus areas, themes, typically happens a month and a half out. And we finalize those, iterate on those, and ultimately get them into the hands of sales before we launch. Post-launch, in real time, we are monitoring customer engagement with the campaign, with the different channels, trying to harvest insights from that so that we can pivot accordingly, and then finalize with a bit of a retrospective. Where are the critical interaction points or interlock points between sales, marketing, and, for that matter, customer success? The first two are at the very top, and this is something that I see so commonly. It's insane that we're helping with this, but marketing is doing these first two steps in a vacuum, independently, in a silo, when they have an entire organization that interacts with prospects and customers, for that matter, that are just sort of so rich in terms of the insights, in terms of what they're hearing, the themes, the pain points, the challenges. And if you're looking for your next idea for a campaign, look no further. Now, you need to structure that. You need to formalize it, and this takes on various formats and functions. But the most basic concept is this of an ABX core team, where it's sort of chaired, if you will, by your ABX program owner. Marketing ops has a big role at that table, and then there's sort of two flavors of salespeople. One are those who are permanent fixtures, more the leadership and management layer, those who have or are interested in having a +1 to really sort of drive this and drive that collaboration. And then the other flavor are the people who are, whose accounts and personas are in scope, so that you can coordinate directly with them, particularly around this next little build I've got here. I told you I'm an ace with the build, so let me get back behind my podium. The reason that you have some of these people in this call or in this function here is so that as the campaign unfolds, you have a direct line to them in terms of Slack or whatever it is. It could be a meeting. I know that you're not in love with that idea, but some of us are a little more old school. To drive that, and you establish a cadence around it. You establish a formal agenda. You don't veer from the agenda. Those are some of the basic tactics to address some of what are very common pitfalls in this ABX orchestration concept. What are your reflections? Where do you see AI, playing a big role here? And I know that I don't want to steal your thunder from the next one, but initial reactions.
So I'll start with this. I don't love all the meetings that we have in my role. I have found the last couple months, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were from 8 a.m. until 5:30, and back to back. I didn't have a chance to actually do any work. So I was the chief meeting officer. It was phenomenal. That was the only thing I accomplished. Until I started having a couple successes, automating some processes. Because a lot of these meetings, these handshakes here, this is a place that maybe we don't fully agree on the best way of doing it. I think a lot of companies may have different ways of doing it. But a lot of this is, I need to give you information so that you can take that information and put it into X system. Well, why am I going through Jamie to do that? Why doesn't the system that's giving me the information that I give to him and to put into that system, can't those two systems start talking? So I'll get into the detail about what that looks like. But if you can start thinking about these handshakes and how much of this is system, person, system, versus here's some insights I have that should change what our strategy is and how we should operate, I would separate those two things. The things that are the system, with humans being the wires between them, let's try and delete that. Things that are I think that we're actually going about our campaigns in the wrong way, or what we've seen is that our in-person events generate 4 times more pipeline per dollar than our webinars and our blog posts and so on. That's what you should talk about in the meetings. That's what I see as the value here. But the reality is we spend a lot of time on these meetings, which causes it to take 6 weeks. Because how am I going to find, I need to get you and you and you in a room. You're flying this week, you're taking your kid to college, and you're with customers for some funny reason. You're actually trying to sell the product. So how do I get the 3 of you in a room? Well, next Tuesday, let's do it. That's why this is 6 weeks, I think, for many companies. This should be start to finish, 3 weeks. And that's including the post stuff. We should be able to finish, to Jamie's point earlier, those badges upstairs, they should already be in the system. And so once it's confirmed those people didn't show, there's a button that says go, and it shoots off. This morning during a session, I opened up my Dripify and hit play on a campaign that I'm running right now for an event I'm hosting in a couple weeks. These are things that are starting to become automated. You don't need to have the human in the loop as much. So we'll talk more detail in 45 seconds about this. But any questions on kind of like what to think about from this?
How's this working for you guys? Do you guys have an ABX, capability framework, officially chartered individual or team that's driving this for you?
I think we've done. We've recently, I would say, made a push into account-based marketing probably a year ago. I would say it became more strategic focus. And all right, we're going to start account-based marketing, really targeting sort of these specific accounts. And I think marketing did a pretty good job collaborating with sales on some of the content, certainly with RevOps and what accounts we're going to focus on. But I was kind of thinking post, like I have no idea how it's going. So like post-launch, I'm really curious, sort of like, man, there needs to be sort of more, maybe a handshake with sales. Right. With Mark said, here's what's working, here's not. Does that make sense to you? What are you seeing? Because I think if we went to like our head of national accounts and said, hey, is account-based marketing working? He'd probably be like, no. But I don't know if marketing would say that, right?
Yeah.
So like, that's more like a handshake on the post-launch.
That's critical. Like, I mean, this is 70% of our business. What we do is help organizations post this, right? Post strategy. And once you roll out an ABM program, your sales leader needs to be educated that a lot of the metrics that she or him are used to tracking are going to be very different, right? It's engagement, it's clicks, it's expansion, it's things like that. It's not MQLs, it's not SQLs. So there has to be, one, we see the tracking. A lot of organizations struggle doing that. And then two, a lot of organizations struggle just because the amount of resources needed to run an ABM at scale is very different than running a normal digital marketing program or a normal kind of spray and pray marketing program, because everything is so personalized. So they want to go out to 200 accounts and end up only getting out to 50. Sales is super frustrating because they were promised 150 of their accounts that didn't actually get touched. So I think this part is usually where organizations do really well. A lot of times because of creative advice from SBI, things like that, but post is where people really struggle.
I'm going to add to that, because I think, like, to your point, the reason that head of sales might not know what's going on is because they don't actually know what the words ABX means, or what those expand to. So there was a PE company turnaround I was spending some time with trying to help them restructure, and the feedback I kept getting from each of the different regional heads of sales, Europe, North America, same thing. What is this ABM thing they keep talking about? When are they going to do it? And it's like, you were at that automotive show last week. You saw the list that you got. You had those meetings, right? Yeah. So when are we going to start doing the ABM thing? So I think a lot of it's just a really high-level conversation in a sales leadership meeting or the executive leadership team of, this is, by the way, the definition of what it is we're talking about. And I think you might see some eyes light up too.
For this client in particular, sorry, just really quickly, we spent an inordinate amount of time just educating the CEO on the motion, on the orchestration and the collaboration and the economics and how they look different, because what they couldn't wrap their mind around, what they really struggled was it costs more, but the deal size is higher, they convert at a greater rate. It should, and it did in this case, pay off. Go ahead, John.
Okay, so I say this tongue in cheek, what's an MQL? And my sales team would like to know what that means.
Yeah, deals are down.
We don't see those. We rolled out, call it ABX, but it's all sales led. So the marketing team says, so tell me what accounts we should focus on. And then they would tell us about what sub-industries you think you should focus on. So the sales team with the sellers, everyone's spent doing all this research instead of doing any kind of prospecting effort. And then when it comes to messaging, it's okay, so tell us what message we should be delivering. And then the messages are sent, it's a surprise to the sellers that their client got spammed, right?
Yeah.
It's a mess.
I mean, that is the nature of this. That is exactly why we're.
How much time do your sellers spend researching a given account on average?
Probably, not too much.
30 minutes, an hour, 5 hours on average. Average number. Just give a round, like what would you say? How much time do you spend on that?
Yeah, maybe 10% maybe.
So half a day a week, roughly? 4 hours a
What
week?
happens is it's cyclical,
Mhm.
right? You spend all this time, and then you put it in, and then you start to build out your campaigns and sales law, and figure out what all your message is. And all this work is done without ever someone reaching out to a prospect.
So you're spending, I'm going to round number, I don't know how much you pay your AEs, but let's just say an upper mid-market AE has an OTA in the 2 to 250K range in a SaaS business. So you're spending $20,000 to $25,000 a year per person, per rep. How many reps in your organization? 12. So 12, let's just come up with some round numbers. You're spending $150 a year on research, right? Does that sound ballpark? Should we go to the next slide and I'll show them how you can save $150,000 a year? I think so too. Yeah. So, do you want to?
No, after you.
Okay. King is dead. Long live the king. When I think about the biggest investments that I'm thinking about companies making in the next 2 years, there's two, and I'm going to cover one right now. Everyone in this room tomorrow should call one of the 3 vendors or 6 like it that I'm going to mention in a minute and get some demos. Because what you need to do is you need to pick a horizontal workflow automation tool. Because all of the AI in the world, we have so many siloed applications, we have some broad use cases, we have frontier models. All of those, if you're not hanging them as hooks off of a workflow automation platform, you are causing your team to do more work than they should, and you are probably double spending in certain situations as well. And so Zapier, talking upstairs, is a great one. Workato, phenomenal. Copy.ai. There's others. N8N is another one I have not used. I can't vouch for it. I've heard of, and I have friends use it. Make.com is another one. Again, I have not had any personal experience with, but I've heard of. Evaluate these tools because I'm going to walk you through a story in a second of something I built in a matter of weeks that you can as well, leveraging these different systems and platforms. That's going to delete that spend and a bunch of other things and add some more capabilities. So we'll start with the word yes. Yes, I will take a meeting.
Got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes? All right. Well, actually, let's start earlier then. We have 10 minutes. When you have your marketing team upload a list from an event, or it's getting ready to do some outbound on a new lead list you sourced from ZoomInfo or what have you, you put it into Salesforce, HubSpot, pick your system of record that you're using there. You should be automatically taking that. All right, we're going to enrich all that. We're then going to look at each of those leads. Let's say it's, Jamie Halpin from SBI reached out and submitted a demo request form on our website. SBI, okay, so it's professional services, strategy consulting. What's our buyer group at a professional services strategy consulting group organization? Well, it's going to be the CFO, CIO, and a partner to represent us. Great. So we have a partner. Now we need to know who the CFO and CIO are. So we should be able to reach out to the internet and reach out into the world and source those 2 names and people, add them to the lead list. We're able to figure out where those 2 people, who should own this account? That's a question we should ask once we've determined an ICP fit. So it's, currently it's not a current account, what territory or what rep gets it. That should be part of this automation as well. You don't need another tool, and I love lean data and all the other ones, but why? And so the next one is deep research. You should be, if you were to open up ChatGPT right now and type in, I run a division of Spark, I'm trying to sell to SBI, help me put together a point of view on how SBI could use the Spark products. You don't even need to be detailed, and it'll give you a half good answer. Imagine what would happen if you had a bit more detail about your product sets in there too, right? And so you trigger that next workflow as well. And you know what you can do? You can build some fields in Salesforce or HubSpot and have that just drop it back in on that account, right, on that account record. So, when I think about account plans, I have a pretty detailed map. But all those are a series of questions I ask the reps to go answer and write back down on a piece of paper. And yeah, I think 10 to 15% is probably a good number. Unfortunately, fortunately, ChatGPT gives me better answers frequently, or Claude or Anthropic or whatever, to those questions than I can get from having a 24-year-old sit down and do some research about a company he's never heard of. And so it's way easier for me to teach that 24-year-old, hey, this is a sheet I want you to learn. I want you know our product, you're learning the company, this is the information on how we can sell to them. So I've just taken away the time they're going to spend researching that, and now I'm spending the time on education. Contact planning. I know Jamie lives in the Midwest. He plays golf. He has 15 children, and he I don't know however many children you have. We've known each other for a while, and he sells into private equity. So our company just closed 4 deals with PE-backed companies. We also just made a partnership with Vista, and that partner we work with also happens to live in the same city as Jamie. And so why can't I have this system? Really, what are the questions I'm asking? Tell me about Jamie's background. Find recent contacts that have similar points of intersect and background as Jamie. Generate a custom email to Jamie that leverages the points of intersect that we just defined with his own background. Looking at the account plan that was just generated and the points of how our product can sell to what the public pressures of SBI, they're talking about at conferences, this nifty thing we just did in Atlanta, that analysts are talking about them, that have, what are our product positioning, and what would Jamie care about as a partner in their private equity practice about that, or a partner in a TMT practice care about that. Take that information and put it into a concise 3-paragraph with 3 bullet point email to Jamie, and put it into Outreach, Gong, whatever. Great. So now that whole step was just done from there to there without a human being touching it. And now you have the human being saying, hey, I'm going to open up Salesforce. I have my lead list for the week. Okay, I see now we have Jamie and the CIO and the CFO of SBI in here. I'm going to read about the company, read about what our positioning should be. Okay, I have an email drafted. I don't like that language. I'm going to modify it because, again, I don't think an AI should be sending the emails yet. I don't think we're there. But I think teeing up content for human beings to process is a great use case. And I'm going to do that outreach. Jamie responds. Jamie says, yeah, I'm going to have a call. Let's start doing this. And actually, maybe it goes further than that. We have 10 calls, 20 calls. You know Jamie. He talks. We have a lot of calls with Jamie. And so we can start. Gong has an API. Chorus has an API. Zoom has an API. You can hook into that, and you can start pulling that data into Snowflake. Same with all the other data we just talked about. Pull it into Snowflake or Databricks, or pick your system. And then you can start querying that and saying, what's speeding up this deal? What's slowing down this deal? Look at all of these different points of record. I have 20 45-minute call transcripts. I have 80 emails. I have these Salesforce records. Jamie also attended these 4 different events that we had, some virtual, some in person. What should we be learning? And you should, your sales leaders, your CMOs, they'll have questions they would want to have answers. That is a workflow that you build with those questions that you're asking of this data set. And you can have that automated. For every time a Snowflake account ID has an update associated to it, rerun this, and then pass that back out to the systems that matter, whether it's Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever. Update the fields that are saying, hey, we think Jamie's propensity to buy just went from a 7 to an 8, because he's attended 4 more events since our last conversation. 3 other people from SBI just filled out demo requests, because which signals he's probably talking about this more internally and is showing interest. Good luck tying that together with humans in different departments. And that's why it takes 6 weeks from the previous slide. It shouldn't. This should happen automatic as we're going. So we have this opportunity health idea that you're now really just a series of workflows that are putting things back into Salesforce, and they're saying, hey, we think that it's time that you reach back out to Jamie now. Because in the last 48 hours, 3 people just submitted these demo requests, because it's his daughter's birthday tomorrow, because here's that new email draft for you. Go back to here, to send to Jamie, or pick up your phone and call him, but here's his phone number. Jamie says yes, Jamie says no in the end. There's going to be a resolution to this deal. Who here is in marketing? No one? Okay. So I ran product marketing for a minute. It took my product marketers about 6 hours every other week to generate some win-loss reviews. Why? Those are a series of questions we are asking, and then some pretty formatting. So what I did is I put together 25 questions I want to ask about every deal that's won, 25 questions I want to ask about every deal that's lost, and then I want to build out a nice abstract for my CEO and for the board. So I now have win-loss reports immediately after a close loss, close won in Salesforce generated. And we'll just append those to the records as well. And those will live somewhere else. And because we did that when we have everything stored in Snowflake, I can also have my data science team start looking at it, drag searchable, and identify, hey, for this industry pressure, we're winning 35% of the time. Or our conversion rate for this industry pressure or for this type of business just doubled. Why? And we can start getting into the real questions that drive our ICP scoring. So I talked about those 3 different scores earlier. We should be selling to the companies that are buying from us. You're welcome. Thank you. That's the So if we can start to track that, we start to identify what that is better, and it's not hard to do. All the data's there. We all collect it anyway. It's just stringing it together and asking the right questions to the data. We're going to increase our conversion rate. We're going to decrease our time to sell. We're going to decrease the amount of time we spend on a lot of these manual processes that we have today. So this is just one thing, okay? This is something you can build out in the next couple of weeks. Pick again, Workato, Copy, et cetera, like Zapier. Pick one and start building. So this is something that I think is the most powerful thing I've taken away last year.
Good. Okay, and that is it for the session. So maybe just in closing, I think we've got literally 1 minute. Reflections from the team, things that you've taken away, changes that you want to make. Obviously, contact info here for Jared. Closing comments from the group.
I have one question. In your wheel there, how are you making sure that when it gets back to the rep, it's being actioned?
So I love that question because it goes right in hand with that enablement conversation earlier. So now that we've taken the time out from doing the manual work that's required, we can start putting a little bit more time in and training people. How are you a better salesperson? My biggest fear with AI is that we're going to eliminate the whole crop of junior salespeople or really reduce that. And how are we going to hire more? How are we going to grow A's? I think we need to invest in the people we hire. And so if I can take away 10% of your time that you're spending on manual things and replace that with 4% of time more on enablement, I think that's a win for your organization. And so to that point is, this is what you do. I love building out these one pager per stage in the sales process. Here's what you do. Here are the outcomes. Here are the discovery questions you should ask, the tools, technologies you should be using. Here's the other departments inside of our own company you should interface at each of these stages. Build that out, train people on how to use it.
You use tasks in Salesforce,
exactly.
Right? You can probably leverage Slack for that.
Slack has some great workflows and automations that you can tie to stages.
Other questions, thoughts before we let you go? JB, thank you very much. We appreciate you. You are the man.